You also have to take into consideration in 1982, going back into my criminal justice, remember I told you I was gonna come back to that. Part of my research that I included in my graduate school study was a topic that is of a big concern right now whenever we think about Michael Brown or Sean Bell, and that is the broken glass theory, right? Broken glass windows theory. Professor Kelling, and I'm trying to remember the other individual, started this huge campaign which is being utilized now, particularly in the NYPD, which basically states that communities where there's high levels of broken glass have a tendency to have high crime rates. So much more police tactics need to be enforced in this area. This particular theory, criminological theory, was utilized during the Giuliani periods in the 1990s that essentially swept out the crime but put it under the carpet. But during this transitional period, that's when a lot of the hip-hop conscious and word movement was starting to come out. It was not ironic, because I don't believe in that. As I sip on my beer, sorry. I don't believe that because it was in 1982, that's the year I was born, it's crazy, that Grandmaster Melly Mel and the Furious Five released a song called The Message. That same year, right? Now, mind you, just like Professor Kelling, and I'm forgetting the other individual who came out with this broken windows theory that was later used by the Giuliani period, embedded in the song, The Message, was broken glass everywhere. People pissing on their pots. People just don't care. He was already giving a sociological analysis of his own neighborhood because he lived here. So there was already music and culture that was coming out of these divested communities, no different than the same communities that were being risen up during the time of Paul the Apostle, right? There's so many similarities and parallelisms when we think about the social historical makeup that makes up our Gospels, why they were written, what was happening, right? During the time of Acts, the book of Acts, there was a huge period of persecution. During the time of hip-hop's upbringing, there was a huge persecution, even by this, you understand that there was a moment where Christianity had hide their identity. It got to the point where the hip-hop community was also doing the same thing, because if you were caught in the corner rhyming, you were taken into custody by the police, just as Jesus was taken to authority because he was speaking, right? So the gospel, according to hip-hop, looks like a spreading of a message that is not necessarily put out in the limelight a lot, because I think a lot of times when we think about hip-hop, we just think about 50 Cent, or we just think about Dr. Dre, or we just think about someone's pants sagging halfway through their pants, you know. Hip-hop consists of elements, right? The graffiti, the b-boying and b-girling, the MCing, and the DJ. But the fifth element is always forgotten, and that is the knowledge piece. And like any other gospel, any other story that discusses humans' relationship with God, there's always a level of covenant, right? In the case of Jesus' story, right, one sort of remix to a lot of Torah studies, it can be found in the Beatitudes, right? Or Torah would suggest and say something like, you know, if you want to divorce your wife, you can actually go and petition and divorce your wife. Whereas in Christianity, Jesus teaches us, well, just by you thinking of someone else outside of your spouse, you're already cheating, right? There's remixes and covenants always happening through the Gospels, and the same thing can also be said through Paul's teaching, right? Because Paul had a different task, and that he was the one truly out there ministering and establishing these churches. The same sort of thing can be said with hip-hop and what it was doing. You know, we can trace hip-hop's spiritual trajectory and grassroots movement through its 40-year history, right? 1990s, you have Public Enemy saying sort of things like fight the power, right? You have in 2001, in May of 2001, 300 hip-hoppers, including KRS-One, Minister Server Tavares, people like MC Light, Crazy Legs, who's a b-boy, all these pioneers, Africa Bambaataa, petitioned to the United Nations and declared that hip-hop is in fact a culture. And what came out of that was the Hip-Hop Declaration of Peace. Someone's birthday. You can find this document online. It's called the Hip-Hop Declaration of Peace. And in it, it was signed by 300 members of the hip-hop community stating that this is not just for entertainment, but empowerment. Then in 2005, Minister Server Tavares, who's a Zulu king, and I'll mention Zulu in a second, they actually put together a document that became a predecessor to the Gospel of Hip-Hop, and he wrote the Hip-Hop Declaration of Spiritual Beliefs. It actually became the first hip-hop ecumenical document. Now, I know I'm kind of bouncing around. I have a tendency to do that, you know, but I like that, so you can put the pieces of the puzzle together where I'm going with this, right? Because the reason I studied at New York Theological was because I wanted ecumenical dialogue. I wanted ecumenical discourse. I've always been very big on multi-faith movements. And without putting in the back end my Catholicism and my faith, I actually bring it to the forefront, but try to find the middle ground. And a lot of times throughout my course of my life, it's been extremely challenging to do that. But whenever I'm put in a position to utilize hip hop, it's allowed me to kind of sort of like break the ice. And I say that because, to close this real quickly, because I mentioned hip hop's covenants, because we need those covenants to remind us of what our purpose is, what we're supposed to be fulfilling. These gospels have not a means to an end, but it's a lot of fill in the blanks. And I think hip hop as an aesthetic, as something that sort of touches on all different elements, it allows for everyone to contribute to it one way or another. I did not mention that when Bam came to the Bronx and told people to drop their weapons and start picking up the elements, he decided to call this the Zulu Nation, which became the first organized hip-hop organization. And Zulu comes from the Amazulu tribe in South Africa, which resisted British occupation for many years. And Amazulu means people of the heavens. So when we think about Pentecost descending from heaven and giving them themselves, these names became that form of empowerment within themselves. So as time progressed, we started to build communities all throughout the Bronx till eventually it spread all over the country and to the world. When hip hop was introduced to me, that's part of the narrative that the question that I asked to build up this global narrative of hip hop is, how was hip hop introduced to you? How did it come to your life? You know, what are you doing to utilize it for change? Because if it's not about peace, love, unity, and having fun, which are the epicenters of hip hop, not just its elements, then you're not doing the hip hop that we're used to, you know?